On her first flight, she panicked, grabbed where she shouldn't, and the millionaire CEO fell in love. Before we start the story, tell us in the comments, from which city are you watching? And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Livia's fingers were gripping the armrest so tightly it looked like they were about to sink into the leather. She was sweating like a kettle about to boil over. It was her first flight, and honestly, she wasn't ready for this. She took a deep breath, trying to follow those tips she had seen on YouTube. Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. Think happy thoughts. Happy thoughts. Happy thoughts. She kept repeating to herself, trembling like a leaf in the wind. To make matters worse, her seatbelt felt more complicated than computer code. She pulled it one way, it slipped the other. Pulled again, it got tangled. By now, she was fighting with that seatbelt like it was some invisible snake. That's when she heard a deep, incredibly charming male voice. "Excuse me, I think that's my seat." Livia looked up and almost forgot how to breathe. Tall, dark hair, impeccable suit, a watch that clearly didn't come with monthly payments, well-groomed beard, strong jawline, intense eyes, and a scent. Oh my. If scents had names, his would be ultimate temptation. "Oh, yes, of course. Sorry," she stammered, trying to pull her backpack, which of course had gotten stuck on the buckle of the seatbelt she hadn't managed to close. She pulled once, twice. On the third try, she lost her balance, bumped her shoulder into him, and nearly knocked over the water bottle sitting in the cup holder. "I'm so sorry. Really? What a mess," she mumbled, shoving the bottle into her bag like someone hiding a crime scene. He laughed, a low, amused laugh that sounded both teasing and incredibly polite. "It's okay. First time flying?" he asked, settling into the seat next to her. "That obvious?" she blurted out without thinking. He smiled. "Not at all, just a guess." The flight attendant walked by checking the seatbelts, and of course hers was more tangled than her love life. The attendant helped her, and she thanked her with an awkward smile, dying inside. "Relax," she heard him say. "It's just a plane. The chances of it crashing are—" He paused dramatically. Livia turned to him with wide eyes. "No, don't even finish that sentence," she cried, covering her ears. He laughed again. "Just kidding. You'll survive." Little did he know, she wasn't so sure. The captain announced takeoff. Livia grabbed the armrest with one hand. When the plane gave that usual lurch, her body moved faster than her brain. Her hand flew to the first place it could find support, and she grabbed where she definitely shouldn't have. It took her about 2 seconds to realize why it felt warm and soft. His eyes glanced down. Hers followed. And oh my goodness, she felt her face burn. Her whole body froze. "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh," she exclaimed, yanking her hand back in panic. "Hey, hold on, this is kind of important to me," he said, trying not to laugh, giving her that playful look she was already starting to hate for being so perfect. "Usually people offer me coffee before getting this close," he said with a smile, clearly enjoying the situation. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. It was panic, I swear. Oh my gosh," she rambled, desperate, wishing she could just dig a hole right there on the plane and disappear. "Relax," he replied, adjusting his suit. "At least now you're loosening up a bit." He winked. He winked at her. He winked at her. "Lord, can you please turn off my existence? I can't handle this embarrassment anymore," she thought, in full internal meltdown. The plane leveled out. She didn't. She stayed quiet, curled up, staring out the window. Not that she could see much. Her vision was too blurry from the nerves. The silence between them was filled with the sound of the engine and her heart trying to escape her chest. Every now and then, she glanced sideways, and he was still there. Handsome, calm, scrolling through his phone, like he hadn't just been the victim of the most misplaced hand on the planet. Livia squeezed her own face, as red as a ripe tomato, not knowing where to hide after. The incident. Her body felt frozen, stiff, while her brain screamed on repeat, "Run, run, run now." And that's exactly what she did. Without thinking twice, she unlocked her seatbelt, tripped over her own feet, and practically bolted down the aisle. She squeezed past other passengers, ignored their looks, and headed straight for the bathroom. As soon as she got inside, she locked the door, leaned her back against it, seized it, and took a deep breath. "What did I do? What did I do?" She kept repeating, pacing back and forth inside that tiny little cubicle. The space was so cramped that with every step, she bumped into the sink, the mirror, the wall, anything that was in the way. She tried to take deep breaths, but it felt like there was no air in there. Her face was burning, her hands were shaking, and her heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it was about to take off on its own. Outside, David was watching from a distance, leaning against one of the seats. At first, he found it funny how she had rushed straight into the bathroom, but then, a small wave of concern hit him. Was she feeling sick? Maybe the nerves had gotten the best of her. He glanced out the window, noticed the plane was flying through some heavier clouds, and realized, yeah, it was a bit bumpy. Without thinking too much, he walked over to the bathroom door and knocked twice. "Hey, you okay in there?" he asked, trying to sound concerned, but the amusement in his voice was impossible to hide. Inside, Livia froze. No way. It can't be him, she thought, staring at the door like it was about to start talking. The moment she reached for the handle to answer, the plane gave a little jolt. The door flew wide open, and David, who had been leaning against it, was thrown straight into the bathroom. "Ouch!" he exclaimed, stumbling forward. Livia screamed, pressing herself against the wall as this tall man was practically thrown on top of her. The space, which was already tiny, now felt about the size of a shoebox. They were smashed together, literally shoulder to shoulder, their faces so close they could feel each other's breath. David grabbed the wall to keep from falling, but one of his hands ended up on her waist. Livia instinctively grabbed his shoulder, trying to create some space, which clearly didn't exist. For a few seconds, neither of them said a word. They just stood there, completely still, staring at each other, breathing fast, trying to process this completely surreal situation. That's when she realized she was staring straight into his eyes. And worse, he had this little smile, half amused, half mischievous, and completely impossible to ignore. Her heart started racing, her hands got sweaty, and without thinking, without being able to stop her mouth, she just blurted out, "You know what? Just kiss me. If this plane goes down, at least I'll die happy." David's eyes widened in surprise for a second, but then that smile on his face grew even bigger. "With pleasure," he replied, lowering his face a bit. And then, it happened, the kiss. A kiss that started fast, a bit clumsy because of the space, but quickly turned into something intense, warm, ridiculously electric. Like all that tension, from the moment he sat next to her, suddenly exploded. His hands held tight to her waist, pulling her closer, if that was even possible in that tiny space. Without thinking, she wrapped her arms around his shoulders, feeling every muscle, every detail, like she was trying to memorize it. The kiss tasted like challenge, like nerves, like adrenaline. But at the same time, it was surprisingly good. Way too good. Her heart was pounding like a marching band in her chest. She didn't know whether to laugh, shake, or wish that this plane would just never land. But like every great movie scene, someone knocked on the door. "Excuse me," came the flight attendant's voice from the other side, sounding rather impatient. "Is everything all right in there?" They both jumped, pulling apart, breathless, eyes wide, trying to catch their breath, and maybe their dignity, which was somewhere between the turbulence and that kiss. David took a deep breath, fixed his hair, and glanced at Livia with that same charming smile. "I guess we should go back, huh?" he said, half embarrassed, half amused by the whole situation. Livia just nodded, bright red, wishing she could turn into a tiny invisible speck and disappear forever. He opened the door. The flight attendant took one look at them, raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She just crossed her arms and watched them walk by. Back at their seats, the silence between them was as loud as the sound of the engines. Livia couldn't even bring herself to look sideways. When the plane landed, before anyone else had even unbuckled, she grabbed her bag, unfastened her seatbelt, and ran. "Bye!" she shouted without even looking back, practically sprinting down the aisle and throwing herself toward the exit. David, still sitting, followed her with his eyes, watching that whirlwind of hair, backpack, and embarrassment disappear among the passengers. He took a deep breath, crossed his arms, looked out the window, and smiled. "Definitely the most interesting passenger I've ever met," he thought. And without realizing, that story was just beginning. The taxi stopped in front of the building, and Livia stared at the huge structure with a mix of excitement, nervousness, and complete fear. "Welcome to New York." The driver helped her get the suitcases onto the sidewalk, and she took a deep breath, trying to hold back an anxiety that felt even bigger than all the skyscrapers in the city put together. New life, new city, new job, and zero chances of running into that man again, she whispered to herself, trying to believe it. After all, what were the chances of running into that man out of 8 million people? Zero. Absolutely zero. She grabbed her bags, adjusted her backpack, and walked toward the building where she would be living with her best friend, Camila. They'd known each other since college, and when Livia said she was being transferred to the New York office, Camila didn't think twice before offering her apartment. As soon as the door opened, Camila appeared with open arms and a huge smile on her face. Finally, "Welcome, girl." The two hugged like they hadn't seen each other in years, even though they'd just had a video call the night before. "You have no idea what this trip was like," Livia began, dropping her bags in the corner. "Oh boy, here comes a story," Camila laughed, crossing her arms. "Tell me." Livia took a deep breath, and with her hands on her face, started to tell everything. The fight with the seatbelt, the handsome man who sat next to her, the very embarrassing moment during takeoff, and, to top it all off, the completely unexpected kiss in the airplane bathroom. Camila's eyes got wider with every detail. "Wait, wait, wait! You grabbed what?" she shouted, then burst out laughing. "Livia, seriously?" "No, I know," Livia said, pacing back and forth. It was reflex panic, and then somehow there was a kiss. A kiss? In the airplane bathroom? Camila was laughing so hard she had to hold her stomach. "That's not real life. That's straight out of a movie." Exactly, but it ended there. "I literally ran off of the plane the moment we landed. I'm never going to see that man again, and honestly, that's for the best." "No way. That's fate, girl," Camila said, winking. "But okay, focus now. Tomorrow's your first day at the company. You're going to do great." "Yes, focus," Livia said, nodding. New life, starting fresh. No more embarrassment, no more confusion. If only she knew. The next morning, Livia stood in front of the giant glass building that housed one of the biggest tech companies in the US. Her heart was racing, her palms were sweaty, and her nerves were even worse than during the airplane takeoff. She gripped her purse tightly, straightened her blouse, took a deep breath, and repeated in her head, "Professional. Serious. IT specialist. Professional. Serious." She walked into the elegant lobby, her eyes scanning the marble walls, the stainless steel elevators, and the giant company logo on the wall. At the reception desk, a cheerful woman greeted her. "Good morning. Your name, please?" "Livia Souza," she said, smoothing her hair. "I'm the new IT specialist." "Oh yes, you're on the list of new hires. Go up to the 25th floor. The receptionist there will take you to the presentation room." "Thank you," she replied with a nervous smile. She stepped into the elevator, pressed the button, and tried unsuccessfully to calm down. With each floor, it felt like her stomach dropped lower. When the doors opened, another receptionist was waiting and pointed her to a hallway on the right, where a group of new employees stood waiting outside a room. She joined them and took a deep breath. "It's fine, just a presentation. After that, I start in the IT department, fix a few computers, maybe deal with some networks, and move on with life." The door opened. "You can come in now," said one of the assistants. The group walked in and took the seats around a large conference table. Livia sat near the end, smoothing her skirt and glancing quietly around the room. Then she heard a voice she knew, one she honestly wasn't expecting or wanting to hear again so soon. "Good morning, everyone," the man's voice echoed through the room. Livia froze. No, it can't be." She slowly turned toward the voice, and there he was. David, tall, sharp, same perfect suit, same neatly styled hair, and that same smile, half serious, half teasing, that seemed designed to throw anyone off balance. Him, the man from the plane, the man from the bathroom, the man from that kiss. And now she was finding out. He was also the CEO of the company. For a few seconds, Livia's brain just stopped working. Nothing made sense. It was like someone had pressed a critical error button in her head. She widened her eyes, held her breath, felt her face heat up, and, on impulse, sank slightly into her chair, trying in any way possible to become invisible. "My name is David Miller. I'm the CEO of this company. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you. I hope you're ready for an amazing challenge." His voice was strong, steady, commanding. But at one point, he paused. His eyes moved around the table, passing over people, until they landed on Livia. And in that second, he froze too. His smile faltered just a bit. For a split second, it seemed like he lost his breath. But he quickly straightened his jacket, took a deep breath, and continued speaking. "Some of you will be working in administrative areas, others in development, finance, marketing, and, of course, information technology, which is one of the core foundations of this company." Livia, on the other hand, was having a full mental breakdown. No way. This can't be real. This isn't happening. This is not happening. "The man I kissed in an airplane bathroom is my boss." She was sweating, shaking. Her heart was racing. Her hands were damp, her whole body tense. "Get up and run, Livia. Simple. Just stand up, walk out, take the elevator, and disappear. No one will notice," she thought, glancing discreetly at the door. But her legs didn't obey. David also seemed to be fighting with his own thoughts. His gaze kept avoiding hers, but inevitably, always returned. And every now and then, a small, almost hidden smile escaped him, like he was saying, We do know each other. Very well. When the presentation ended, the assistant started calling each person to introduce their departments. Livia Souza, she called. Livia stood up, almost tripping over her own chair, completely shaky. As she approached, David adjusted his suit, took a deep breath, and smiled. That half-crooked, slightly dangerous, and completely charming smile. "Welcome, Livia," he said, extending his hand. She looked at his hand, then at his eyes, then back at his hand, and shook it, immediately feeling that same electric jolt she felt on the plane. "Thank you," she stammered, almost swallowing her own tongue. He held her hand a little longer than necessary, keeping his eyes locked on hers. "It's going to be interesting working with you," he added, with a tone full of meaning. Livia wanted to melt. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to turn into a decorative plant and vanish right there. But no, this was just the beginning. The next morning, Livia woke up more anxious than ever. No matter how hard she had tried to sleep, her mind kept playing a movie over and over again, and the title was simple. The man from the plane, the bathroom, the kiss, is my boss. She tossed and turned in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that everything was fine, that she was a professional, a qualified IT technician, that this tiny detail from the past, also known as that kiss inside an airplane bathroom, would stay exactly where it belonged, in the past. Professional Livia. Focus on work. Forget. Forget. She kept repeating to herself while drinking coffee, fixing her hair, and checking herself in the Times. Camila, her best friend, stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a coffee mug. "All this just to go to work? Or are you getting married and forgot to tell me?" she teased, laughing. "Camila," she answered, holding her hairbrush, looking like she was on the verge of a breakdown. My boss, is that man, that one." "I know, and honestly, this just keeps getting better." Camila crossed her arms, thoroughly enjoying the drama. This could be a movie. Livia let out a sigh, grabbed her bag, and stared at the door. "All right, I can do this. I'll focus on work. I'm professional. Cold, technical, immune. Immune. Sure," Camila replied, trying not to laugh. "Just try not to bring down the whole company today, okay?" Little did she know, the company building looked even bigger and more intimidating than the day before. But this time, Livia took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and headed to the elevator, determined not to let her thoughts sabotage her own future. When she arrived at the IT department, she was greeted by Lucas, one of the analysts, who immediately handed her a badge and showed her the desk where she would be working. "Welcome to the chaos. The team," he joked, smiling. "Thank you," she replied, adjusting her laptop and getting familiar with the system. "Don't worry, technological messes are kind of my thing." She connected to the network, opened the internal systems, and started reviewing some of the requests already assigned to her. But there was a small problem. A detail. An uncontrollable variable. Her brain simply wouldn't erase the image of David. Focus, Livia. Work. Spreadsheets. Code. Network, she thought, trying her best to look extremely busy and dedicated. But it wasn't working. Every time someone walked by the hallway, she glanced over, hoping, or maybe dreading, not to see him. But of course, there he was. Suddenly, that tall, sharp figure showed up at the IT department door, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and holding a folder, which clearly he didn't need. "Excuse me," his voice came through, firm, serious, but with that tone she was already starting to recognize as playfully mischievous. I just wanted to check. Are the chairs okay?" Silence. Lucas looked at him, a bit confused. "The chairs." David cleared his throat, locking eyes with Livia. "Yeah, if they're comfortable. I wouldn't want my employees to suffer from back pain, you know. Ergonomics is key." Livia almost choked on her own breath. He's not asking that. He's not here because of a chair, she thought, fighting the urge to stick her head inside her laptop. "Oh yes, everything's perfect. Very comfortable," she replied, forcing a smile, having no idea what to do with her hands. "Great," he smiled, looking straight into her eyes. "If you need anything, I'm right here." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a trail of silence, confusion, and a whole lot of internal screaming. As soon as he disappeared down the hall, Lucas turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "That was strange." "It was," she answered, burying her face in the monitor. "He probably just really cares about ergonomics." "Sure, ergonomics," Lucas replied, trying not to laugh. Hours passed, but they did nothing to help Livia's mental state. She tried focusing on the tickets, the reports, the code, but her thoughts just kept slipping away. And then, an idea popped into her head. An idea that made absolutely no sense. She looked at the network system, saw the main computer name, checked the login, and yep, it was his. David Miller, the CEO. She took a deep breath. "This is insane," she whispered to herself. But before her rational brain could scream louder, she clicked disconnect. Done. His computer. Lost internet. The regret hit instantly. Oh my God, what have I done? And then, the internal phone lit up. Incoming call, David Miller. She swallowed hard, picked up. "Eat support, good morning." "Good morning, Livia." His voice was firm, but she could clearly hear the amusement behind it. "It seems I've lost my connection." "Oh, wow, really?" She tried to sound surprised. That's strange." "Very strange," he replied. "Could you come to my office and check?" "Of course, I'm on my way." She stood up, feeling her heart pounding like crazy. She grabbed her laptop, straightened her blouse, took a deep breath, and walked to his office, trying her best to look professional, even though inside she was about to faint. When she arrived, he opened the door and stepped aside to let her in. "Come on in," he said, smiling. The office was huge, elegant, with an entire wall of glass overlooking Manhattan, a perfectly organized desk, a bookshelf full of books, and a few framed certificates on the wall. She walked over to the desk, opened her laptop, and pretended to focus completely. "Let me check here," she said, typing quickly. David crossed his arms, leaned against the desk, and just watched. "You know," he started, his tone casual. "If every network issue were this interesting, maybe I should disconnect my internet more often." Livia stopped typing for a second, feeling her face burning. "Well, you know, sometimes these things happen," she replied, nearly stammering. "Tech stuff." He moved a little closer, standing beside her, resting one hand on the desk, practically boxing her in. "So, tell me, Livia." His voice dropped, softer, and a little more dangerous. Was this really a technical issue, or a disguised cry for help? Her eyes widened. She had no idea what to say. I don't know what you're talking about," she tried, avoiding his gaze. David let out a low chuckle. "Of course you don't," he said, pushing away and leaning back against the desk. But you know, if my internet goes down again, I might start getting suspicious. Livia adjusted her laptop, finished reconnecting him, which, obviously, she was the one who disconnected, and took a deep breath. All set? It's working now, she announced, standing up. Perfect, he replied, crossing his arms. You know, you're an excellent tech. She smiled, a little awkward, hugging the laptop to her chest like it could somehow shield her. Thank you, she replied. She held back a laugh, squinted her eyes, and almost tripped out the door while David stayed behind, smiling to himself and shaking his head. Definitely the most interesting employee that's ever walked through here, he thought, watching her disappear down the hallway. Outside, Livia leaned against the wall, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "This is going to be a lot of work." The clock showed exactly 4:47 a.m. when Livia walked into the company building that morning. She had a coffee in one hand and her bag in the other, walking through the halls, trying to look natural. But it wasn't working. Her mind was too busy replaying everything that had happened the day before. David, her accidentally unplugged connection, his look, that teasing smile, the way he got close and spoke as if every word had a carefully planned double meaning. She smiled to herself, hugging the coffee cup against her chest. Focus, Livia. Focus. Work. Networks. Tech. Professionalism, she kept repeating in her head. She greeted a few coworkers, sat at her desk, turned on her laptop, and took a deep breath. Today will be calm, just work. No incidents. She had no idea how wrong she was. About 30 minutes later, the network alert panel started blinking. At first, Livia thought it was just a routine problem. It happened. Minor bugs, tiffed server drops, some department pushing an old system too hard. But the moment she opened the security console, the smile disappeared from her face. Line after line of code started appearing on the screen. External connections, unauthorized requests, multiple access attempts on different servers. Her eyes scanned the code, and in that moment, every alarm in her head went off. "This isn't a bug," she whispered, eyes wide. "This is an attack." She immediately pulled up the firewall panel and confirmed it. A hacker attack. In real time, the numbers were jumping. Over 400 access attempts per second, coming from different IP addresses, spread across several countries. It was a coordinated attack. Panic started to rise, but instead of freezing, Livia shifted into a mode very few people knew she had. Complete focus. "Lucas," she called, standing up. "Are you seeing this?" Lucas looked at his screen, typed a few commands, and his eyes widened. "What the? How?" "External attack," she replied, pulling the keyboard closer. "They're trying to get into our data servers." Two other colleagues heard her and came over, opening their own consoles. But before anyone could say a word, Livia noticed something that made her heart race even faster. They're trying to access the confidential folder," she said, typing rapidly. This wasn't just any folder. It held million-dollar contracts, tax documents, patents, sensitive company data, even projects that hadn't been released to the market yet. If that information got out, it could mean billions in losses. "We've got to block them," Lucas shouted, starting to sweat. Livia looked at her team quickly, took a breath, and took control. "Everyone close your screens. Now, let me handle it." But Lucas started confused. "Trust me." "Just do it," she answered, more serious than ever. They looked at each other, but followed her lead. Livia activated the system's administrator mode, accessing areas only a handful of people in the company could reach. She was typing faster than she thought possible. Her fingers flew over the keyboard while her mind built, in seconds, a strategy that would normally take hours. Come on. Come on. Not today. Not on my network, she muttered, biting her lip. First, she redirected the attacking IPs to a decoy server. Then, she launched a protocol to isolate the critical data, moving sensitive files to a secure environment completely cut off from the outside network. But the attackers were fast. Very fast. Every time she blocked one route, they found another weak spot. No, you're not getting past me, she growled, activating an extra layer of encryption. Not part of the company's standard protocol, but a technique she had created herself years ago during a personal project. Just as things seemed to stabilize, she noticed another attack attempt. This time, through the internal access gate. Seriously? Even here? She said, pushing her chair forward and typing so fast it looked like a concert pianist at work. She built a defense script that basically turned any access attempt into a dead-end maze. The hackers kept falling into the trap, trying, restarting, insisting, but they couldn't get through anymore. And finally, after almost 20 minutes, the control panel started to stabilize. The attack lines began to disappear. The unauthorized connections were being shut down. She had won. Livia took a deep breath, letting out air she hadn't even realized she was holding. She looked to the side. All her co-workers were standing still, staring at her with a mix of shock, admiration, and total disbelief. Is everything okay? Lucas asked, almost whispering. She turned in her chair, fixed her hair, crossed her arms, and answered, trying to regain her composure. For now, yes, the attack was blocked. All the access points were redirected, and the data is safe. That was... Lucas couldn't even finish the sentence. That was insane. It was, she replied, letting out a long sigh. And if someone could bring me a bottle of water, I'd really appreciate it. Her co-workers laughed, relieved. But deep down, everyone knew. She had just saved the company. Meanwhile, across the floor, David was in a meeting room with 3 directors when his phone started buzzing non-stop. Internal notifications, system alerts, messages from the IT team. He frowned, cutting off the finance director mid-sentence. "One moment," he said, picking up the phone. As he read the messages, his face turned serious. "What's going on?" one of the directors asked. David didn't answer. He just stood up, straightened his suit, and with determined steps, headed toward the IT department. When he reached the doorway, the first thing he saw was Livia, still catching her breath, fixing her hair, while the monitor displayed the final logs showing the attack being blocked. "What happened?" he asked, his tone steady, looking straight at her. Everyone fell silent, clearing a path for him. Livia stood up, held her laptop against her chest, and explained. The company was hit by an external attack. They were trying to break into the network to access the confidential folder. If I hadn't isolated the data and created an emergency block, we would have lost everything. David stared at her. His look was a mix of surprise, shock, and pure admiration. "You managed to stop the attack by yourself?" he asked, stepping a little closer. She took a deep breath. "Yes, I noticed a security flaw in the system. None of the current protocols were working. So I improvised." He crossed his arms, looking at her like he was discovering a whole new side of her. Besides being beautiful, she's brilliant, he thought, unable to stop the thought from forming in his mind. But he didn't say that. He just let out a small smile and adjusted his suit jacket. "I want a full report on my desk." "And well done, Livia," he said, holding his gaze on her just a bit longer than what would be considered strictly professional. Really well done. Livia felt her cheeks burn, but kept her posture. Yes, sir, you got it. He held back a bigger smile, gave her one more look, and just before turning away, he said in a lower voice, "If I didn't know you worked in IT, I'd say you're a secret agent." She held back a laugh, shook her head, and sat back down, pretending to focus on the report. David walked back toward his office. But as he did, he couldn't help thinking, definitely, besides being beautiful, this woman is brilliant. And without even realizing it, the CEO, who was usually cold, calculated, and completely focused on work, was falling for her. The next day at the company started with a different energy. The place felt busier than usual. People were walking back and forth, phones ringing non-stop, and above all, there was something in the air that didn't go unnoticed. Livia noticed it the moment she walked through the front door. She carried her coffee in one hand, her backpack over her shoulder, trying to look like the most relaxed person in the world, even though inside, her mind was still too busy processing the past few days. Focus. Today, it's just work. Nothing but work, she kept repeating to herself, trying to ignore the possibility of running into David at any moment in the hallways. But it was impossible not to notice. David was more restless than ever. He walked back and forth with folders in hand, taking call after call, speaking quickly, with a serious tone that wasn't typical for him. Curious, Livia watched discreetly from her desk, while pretending to review system logs. Every time he passed by, she caught snippets like, "This needs to close before Friday. No translator. No deal. No, I need someone fluent, but I haven't found anyone with the right profile." She raised an eyebrow, frowning. What kind of mess is this? All morning, she watched him scrolling through translation agency websites, opening applications, checking profiles. And at the end of each search, he'd shake his head in frustration, clearly unhappy with everything he found. As time went by, the tension just kept building. Lucas, her co-worker from IT, noticed it too. "Something big is going on," he said, shaking his head, while glancing toward the executive office. "He's been like that since he got here." Livia nodded. "I noticed too. Looks like the world's ending in there." "Think a contract fell through?" Lucas asked, curious. "Could be. Or maybe not enough comfortable chairs," Livia replied, laughing. They both chuckled, but deep down, their curiosity only grew. The day dragged on. Between one support ticket and the next, Livia tried to stay focused, but now and then, her eyes would wander toward the hallway, watching David pacing back and forth, checking his phone, frowning, clearly stressed. By mid-afternoon, she realized he looked even more tense than before. "Wow," she muttered to herself. "I've never seen him this, I don't know, stressed." The mood stayed like that until, near the end of the day, the office started to empty out. Most employees had already left. Livia took advantage of the quiet moment to call her cousin in Germany. She needed to finally sort out an old issue with a bank account she'd kept from her exchange student days. The moment the call connected, she automatically switched to German. "Hello? Alles gut? Ich wollte dich was fragen," she said, gesturing naturally like it was the most normal thing in the world. The conversation flowed quickly, full of expressions and a flawless accent. What Livia didn't know was that, at that exact moment, David was walking down the hall, distracted, still looking over some documents. He suddenly stopped. He froze for a few seconds, staring toward her office with a look of surprise, disbelief, and relief. The CEO, who had been on the verge of losing his mind trying to find a translator, just stood there, completely stunned, listening to Livia's perfect German. He blinked a few times, trying to process what he was hearing, then crossed his arms and casually leaned against the doorframe, listening. When she hung up and turned around, she nearly jumped out of her skin. He was standing right there, watching her with that intense look of curiosity, and something else she couldn't quite figure out. "You," he started, raising an eyebrow. "You speak German?" The shock was so big, Livia nearly dropped her phone. "Oh, wow," she fumbled, trying to act normal. Yeah." David stepped a bit further into the room, crossed his arms, and tilted his head slightly, clearly intrigued. "How is that possible?" She took a deep breath, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and explained. "I did an exchange program in Germany for almost 2 years. I lived there with my cousin. Then I came back. But, we've always kept in touch, so I never lost the practice." He narrowed his eyes, processing that, and then smiled. "You have no idea how you just solved my biggest problem of the day," he said, with that mysterious, amused tone. "What do you mean?" she asked, a little wary. David stepped closer, resting one hand on her desk, the other arm crossed over his chest. "I've got a really important meeting in Germany. It's a billion-dollar deal with investors who aren't too comfortable speaking English. I've spent the entire day looking for a translator, but couldn't find anyone who fits." Livia's eyes widened. "And where do I come in?" she asked, folding her arms, a bit suspicious of where this was going. He smiled, leaning in slightly. "You're coming with me." "What?" She practically jumped out of her chair. No, wait. What do you mean?" "It's simple," he replied, as if explaining he was ordering coffee. "You speak German perfectly, and you already work here. I trust you way more than some outside translator who knows nothing about our business." She blinked several times, trying to figure out if this was actually happening. "You? You want me? To go with you? To Germany?" David nodded, arms crossed. "Exactly." "But..." Livia opened her mouth, then closed it, completely speechless. "I'm an IT technician. I work with code, networks, routers, not international contracts." He shrugged. "Well now, in addition to all that, you're also my official interpreter." She grabbed her head with both hands, stood up, and started pacing, full-on panic mode. "This is insane. I still can't believe I even had the nerve to, that flight, that bathroom, that kiss, and now a plane again? With you? Again?" David let out an amused laugh, resting his chin on his hand, clearly entertained by her panic. "Exactly. A plane, only this time, with lots of hours." She took a deep breath, squinted, and held on to the back of the chair. "Are you serious?" "As serious as it gets," he replied, looking straight into her eyes. "This contract is very important, and you're exactly the person I need by my side in that meeting." For a few seconds, Livia stood completely still, staring at Adam, her mind racing through all the possible meanings behind this. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Again, on a plane? With him? Dear Lord, help me." David couldn't help it. He laughed out loud, shaking his head and crossing his arms. "Better start packing, Livia. Our flight is tomorrow night." "Tomorrow," she nearly shouted. "This is getting ridiculous." He winked, amused. "Welcome to my world." And in that very moment, they both knew, though neither would admit it, that this trip wasn't going to be just about business. When Livia woke up the next day, The first thing that came to her mind was, this can't be happening. This can't be happening. But it was. She was actually getting on a plane. Again. With David. Again. And this time, it wasn't a domestic flight. It was international. More than 10 hours in the air. 10 hours with him on a plane. Help. Camilla, of course, was having the time of her life, watching her friend pacing back and forth, packing like she was heading to Mars instead of Germany. Take it easy, girl. How long do you think you're staying? I don't know what to pack. I don't know how to pack for a business trip. With my boss. Who's also? That man. She answered, tossing a blouse onto the bed, totally overwhelmed. Camilla laughed, arms crossed. You're packing more anxiety than clothes. Livia groaned, pressing her hand to her forehead. I can't mess this up. Not even a little. If only she knew. The airport felt even more intimidating than the first time. But this time, Livia took a deep breath and told herself, hands on the armrest. Only the armrest. When she spotted David near the boarding gate, she almost lost her breath. He looked incredibly sharp. Light blue dress, shirt, tailored blazer, and that kind of presence that made the rest of the room fade away. He smiled when he saw her. I'm glad you came. I said I would, didn't I? She replied, adjusting the strap on her shoulder, trying not to look like a nervous teenager. They went through immigration, boarded, and took their seats in first class. Yes, he insisted on it. And as soon as Livia sat down, she felt the same nervous flutter in her stomach as before. She gripped the armrests tightly. Not today, hand. You're not embarrassing me today. David noticed and smiled, finding the whole thing kind of adorable. Relax, Livia. You're going to be fine, he said in that playful tone she already knew too well. And if not, at least there won't be turbulence like last time. She took a deep breath. I'm okay. I'm okay, she kept saying, gripping the seat like it was a life vest. As the plane took off, she kept her hands firmly planted, eyes forward, determined not to repeat the scene from the last flight. David, on the other hand, was clearly enjoying himself. Proud of you, he said, holding back laughter. No flying hands this time. She turned her head and narrowed her eyes at him. Don't even bring that up, he chuckled, shaking his head. Don't worry, Livia. You're going to do great. She took a deep breath, looked at him, and for the first time felt something beyond the nerves and tension. Confidence, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of something else in his eyes. When they landed in Germany, they went straight to the hotel, dropped off their bags, and then headed to the investors' company. The building was impressive, modern, with glass facades and a structure that left anyone in awe. While they rode the elevator, David adjusted his blazer, took a deep breath, and looked at her. All good? She nodded, trying to seem more confident than she really was. All good. When the elevator doors opened, they were greeted by 3 executives, all German. Serious, polite, extremely formal. The meeting started off tense. They spoke among themselves in German, reviewing contracts, questioning clauses, and expressing doubts at a speed that would have lost anyone not fluent by the first sentence. That's when Livia stepped in. With the same confidence she had when working with networks and code, she started translating. Only it wasn't just translation. She explained, clarified, gave context, and answered questions before David even had a chance to speak. As you can see, our system is fully scalable, she began, and then translated for David. They want to know if our system is scalable and if it can handle the demand they're projecting. David nodded, and Livia continued, explaining every detail as if she had been part of the negotiation team for years. It didn't take long for the investors' doubtful looks to start softening. They began to smile, nod in agreement, and little by little, the tense atmosphere shifted to something much more welcoming. At one point, one of the executives said something in German, laughing, and Livia translated with a smile. He said he's never seen an IT technician speak German like this and know so much about the business. David smiled, crossing his arms, looking straight at her, with that look she already knew how to read so well. Admiration, and more, much more. At the end of the meeting, after 2 hours of intense conversation, contracts, numbers, and proposals, the investors shook hands. Smiling. "We'll come on board," they said, signing the papers. Livia translated, with a big smile. "Welcome aboard." They accepted. David let out a relieved sigh, and on impulse grabbed her hand, giving it a firm squeeze. "You were amazing." She smiled, a bit shyly, feeling that familiar tightness in her chest that only he seemed able to cause. "I just did my job." He shook his head, looking straight into her eyes. "No, you did much more than that." Later, back at the hotel, after all the tension had passed, David showed up at her door. Livia opened it to find him looking more casual. No blazer, shirt with 2 buttons undone, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly messy, and, of course, that cologne that seemed tailor-made to destroy any bit of resistance she might still have. "Hi," she said, trying not to sound nervous. "Hi," he replied, smiling. "I was thinking, after today, we deserve to celebrate. Want to have dinner with me?" Her heart skipped a beat. "Sure," she answered, trying to sound casual, though her legs felt a little weak. The restaurant had a beautiful view of the city, lights, illuminated buildings, and that kind of magical atmosphere that made everything feel like a scene from a movie. The conversation flowed naturally. They talked about everything: work, travel, family, studying abroad, dreams, even about how she once tried to make a traditional German dish that never turned out right. David laughed, relaxed, lighter than she'd ever seen him, and every time he smiled, every time he looked at her that way, the world seemed to slow down. When dinner ended, they left the restaurant and stood there on the sidewalk watching the city. For a few seconds, they stayed silent, just looking at each other. Then David stepped closer, gently held her chin, and in a softer tone asked, "May I?" She didn't answer with words. She just nodded, closing her eyes. And then, the kiss happened. Different from the one on the plane, different from the one in the bathroom. This one wasn't accidental. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't the result of turbulence or a desperate escape. It was, simply, because they both wanted it. The kiss started soft, but quickly grew more intense, more full of want, like they'd been holding it back for far too long. His hands held her waist. Hers moved up to his neck, pulling him closer. The world disappeared. The city lights, the sound of traffic, the cool breeze, all gone. There was only them. When they finally pulled apart, still with their faces close, David smiled and whispered, "This has no excuse." She smiled back, lightly biting her lip, and no escape. They laughed, still with their foreheads touching, and in that moment they both knew nothing would ever be the same again. The plane landed in New York early in the evening, bringing back 2 people who, no matter how much they tried to pretend, knew they weren't the same as when they boarded a few days earlier. Livia stared out the window, heart tight, trying to understand how a business trip had turned into the biggest mess of feelings she'd ever experienced. Across the aisle, David looked more relaxed than ever, with that slight smile on his lips, arms crossed, and that gaze that needed no caption. They didn't say much while disembarking. Maybe from nerves, maybe from fear of facing what was clearly happening between them. Or maybe just to pretend they were going back to normal routine. But who were they kidding? The next morning, Livia arrived at the company earlier than usual. No matter how much she tried, she couldn't control the anxiety. What they had lived in Germany felt like a movie she didn't want to wake up from. But now, they were back to reality. Office, boss, ID badge around her neck, and that invisible rule that said, don't get involved with the boss. Professional. Focus. I'm an IT technician, not a character in some romantic movie. She kept repeating to herself, adjusting her hair and taking a deep breath in front of the elevator mirror. The moment she walked into the IT office, she realized she wasn't the only one with that thought. Lucas, her coworker, glanced at her with a mischievous grin. "So, how was Germany?" he asked, folding his arms, clearly expecting some juicy detail. It was. Livia tried to sound casual as she sat down. "Work. Lots of work." "Work?" "Sure," he replied, barely holding back a laugh. "And that gorgeous CEO you call your boss? Worked hard too, huh?" She rolled her eyes. "Lucas, please, focus on the system." But deep down, she knew it was pointless. That silly smile on her face gave everything away. As the day went on, the glances started. Every now and then, David would walk past the hallway, carrying a folder that clearly didn't need to go anywhere. And every time their eyes met, a little smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. She pretended to be focused on her laptop, but the sound of his shoes on the hallway floor was enough to wipe out any concentration. And then, the internal messages began. "David, server in room 45 seems unstable. Can you check it?" "Sure." "Just the server? Or is your chair acting up too?" It took him all of 2 seconds to reply. "David, now that you mention it, the chair's a little wobbly. Better check that, too." Livia held back a laugh, shaking her head. Lucas, sitting across from her, raised an eyebrow. "Why are you smiling like that?" he asked, suspicious. "Oh, it's nothing. Just a technical issue," she answered, typing quickly to look super professional. A few hours later, David, using his usual excuse of checking the company's infrastructure, stopped by the IT office. "Everything good in here?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Without even looking, Livia replied, pretending to be deeply focused. "Everything's running perfectly so far." He smiled. "Good. If you need anything, my door's open." As soon as he walked away, Lucas immediately turned to her. "Okay, there's no denying it anymore. What's going on?" "What?" "Nothing," Livia replied, pushing her glasses up, clearly flustered. "It's just work, Lucas." He crossed his arms, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Aha, and I'm an astronaut." They both laughed, but the truth was, there was no hiding it anymore. And then came lunchtime, and things got even funnier. Livia was standing in line at the cafeteria when she realized David was right behind her. She tried to act natural, but the moment she turned to grab a napkin, her coffee cup tipped over. "Oh, no," she muttered, trying to catch it, but the whole cup spilled all over the counter. David held back a laugh, grabbing some napkins. "It's okay, Livia. It's just coffee." She sighed, putting a hand to her forehead. "I'm a walking disaster." He smiled as he helped clean up. "Well, if you're going to make a mess, At least do it near me. She blushed instantly, looking away. Stop. But then, she noticed. 2 tables ahead, 3 co-workers were watching everything, whispering, smiling, clearly drawing their own conclusions. Yep, it had started, and it didn't stop there. On her way back to the office, as she walked past the reception desk, Livia tripped over her own flat shoe, bumped into the counter, and nearly knocked over the company's brochure stand. The receptionist looked up, startled. Are you okay? Livia brushed her hair behind her ear, trying to play it cool. Totally fine. You know, gravity. It loves me. And guess who was coming down the hallway? Watching it all? David. He crossed his arms, trying not to laugh. Just another normal day for my favorite IT technician. She rolled her eyes, pressing her lips together to keep from laughing. Cut it out. And once again, curious stares popped up from every corner. The rest of the day carried on like that, full of little situations that to anyone watching were absolutely obvious. Something was definitely going on between them. But life always finds a way to remind you. It's never that simple. Because deep down, both Livia and David knew that as fun, light, and full of chemistry as this whole thing was, they still had to face one tiny little thing called reality. After all, he was the CEO. She was a brand new employee, an IT technician. And as much as the smiles, the glances, and those stolen kisses in another country felt perfect, New York wasn't Germany. And deep down, they both knew this was just the very first hint of a storm that was quietly brewing. The day had actually started a little too normal for the usual chaos Livia was already used to. Most of the company staff seemed to be in external meetings, traveling, or taking long lunches. The office felt quieter, almost suspiciously so. She was alone in the IT room, adjusting some network security settings. Ever since that hacker attack, she'd started triple-checking everything when she heard the sound of high heels echoing in the hallway. At first, she figured it was someone from HR, or maybe legal. She didn't even bother to look until the footsteps stopped right at the doorway. "Excuse me," came a woman's voice. Cold, firm, and dripping with arrogance. Livia slowly looked up, and the second she did, she knew this wasn't going to end well. Standing in front of her was a perfectly put-together woman. Fitted dress, stiletto heels, perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, and that kind of stare that could cut through anyone. The woman crossed her arms, leaned slightly over the desk, and fired away, without even introducing herself. "What do you think you're doing with my husband?" Livia's heart stopped. It just stopped. She blinked. Once, twice, 3 times, and still wasn't sure she'd heard right. "I'm sorry," she asked, trying to hide the tremble in her voice. "Oh, you heard me just fine," the woman said, raising one eyebrow and narrowing her eyes. "I'm not blind or stupid. I see very well the kind of game you're playing. I just came here to make it clear. He has a wife, and that's me." For a few seconds, everything around Livia became a blur. The sound of typing, phones ringing, the hum of the air conditioner. It all disappeared. Her heart started racing so fast, she had to hold onto the desk just to stay on her feet. "Sorry, but are you saying that David is your—" She swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. "Husband?" The woman crossed her arms and gave a smug, sideways smile. The kind people wear when they think they've already won. "That's right, so do yourself a favor and get out of his life." Livia's stomach turned, her chest tightened. "This can't," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "This can't be true." The woman leaned in closer, resting her long fingers on the desk. "Oh, it's very true," she said coldly. "And if you think you're the first one to try, you're not. He has this flaw. He gets infatuated easily. But in the end, he always comes back. Because he's my husband. Got it?" Livia took a deep breath, but the air just wouldn't come. It was a wave of shock, sadness, anger, and shame. A kind of shame that burned in every part of her body. She tried to speak, but couldn't. Her throat closed up, her eyes began to sting, and she knew that if she didn't breathe deeply right then, the tears would start falling. The woman smiled, adjusted her purse on her shoulder, and before walking out added, "Make the smart choice. Step aside." And just like that, she left. Leaving Livia there, completely wrecked, sitting in her chair, staring at nothing, her heart in pieces. Time seemed to freeze. She didn't know how long she sat there, staring at the computer screen without understanding a single line of code. Every thought hit like a hammer. "I'm just an employee. He's the CEO. Of course, this was never going to make sense. How could I be so foolish?" The tightness in her chest made it hard to even breathe. And later, when she heard David's firm footsteps approaching on that floor, she realized she couldn't pretend. She needed answers. Right now. She stood up, wiped her sweaty hands on her pants, took a deep breath, and walked straight to his office without even thinking. She knocked once and walked in without waiting for a reply. David was taking off his jacket, adjusting his tie, but the moment he saw her face, pale, tense, eyes full of tears, he stopped immediately. "Livia? What happened?" She crossed her arms, trying to hold back the tears, breathing deeply, and then burst out. "Are you married?" The silence that followed was deafening. David's eyes widened. He took 2 steps toward her, clearly confused. "What? What are you talking about?" "No. Don't lie to me," she shouted, pointing a finger at him, the tears finally spilling over. "Don't do this to me. I deserve at least the truth." David ran a hand through his hair, clearly shaken, breathing deeply. "Livia, I'm not married." He shook his head. My God, she came here, didn't she? She hugged her arms across her chest, feeling like she might fall if she didn't hold on. She did, and she was very clear. She said, "You're her husband." She told me to get out of the way. David closed his eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and stepped closer, gently holding her shoulders. "Look at me. Look at me," he said, calm but firm. "I'm not married. I'm divorced, for months now. But she doesn't accept it. She shows up. She intrudes. She does this. She follows me." Livia blinked, trying to take it all in, but the knot in her chest wouldn't go away. "Why? Why didn't you ever tell me that?" He squinted, lowered his head for a second, and answered. "Because I didn't want you to see me like this, with this messy past. I didn't want it to push you away." She let out a nervous laugh, shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. "Well, congratulations. It worked perfectly." David cupped her face, looking straight into her eyes, desperate. "Livia, I'm serious. I'm not married. I'm completely in love with you, and I was going to tell you. I swear I was, but I was scared of losing you." She closed her eyes, feeling her chest tighten even more. "And I'm scared of myself," she whispered. "Scared of fooling myself. Scared of believing this." She motioned between them, that this could actually work. He grabbed her hands, holding them tightly. "It can work. It really can." But she shook her head, stepped back, and let go of his hands. I need to go. I can't. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "I'm just an employee, David. You're the CEO. I've been lying to myself. I thought—" She wiped her tears. "I thought this could be more than it is. Livia, no. Don't do this. Don't walk away," he begged, taking a step toward her. But she was already at the door, already crying. "I'm sorry. I just can't," she said before leaving him behind. David stood in the middle of the room, staring at the closed door, with his chest aching, his hands trembling, and his gaze lost. And for the first time in years, he felt completely powerless. David sat on the couch in the executive office, completely still. His phone lay on the table, his hands folded, staring at the floor, as if suddenly, nothing around him made sense anymore. Never in his entire life had he imagined he could feel like that. "She's gone," he kept repeating to himself, "and it's all my fault." The emptiness in his chest felt so heavy, it was hard to breathe. And for the first time, that powerful, confident CEO who made million-dollar decisions without blinking had no idea what to do. Across town, in their shared apartment, Livia lay curled up on the couch, hugging a pillow, her face swollen from crying so much. Camila, her best friend, was pacing back and forth, holding a bag of chips in one hand and a glass of soda in the other. "Okay, hold on." She stopped right in front of Livia. "Let's get this straight, because this is starting to look like a soap opera, and I refuse to be just the funny side character." Livia sniffled, hugging the pillow tighter. "I'm such an idiot." "No, no, no." Camila raised her finger, shaking it. "You're not allowed to say that. You're not an idiot. You're an amazing, incredible, wonderful woman, and—" she glanced at the pillow. "A woman who clearly needs to wash this pillow. It's already soaked up half a liter of tears." Livia laughed through her tears, squinting her eyes. "I got my hopes up, Camila. He's a CEO, and I'm just me." Camila crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. "Okay, and he's a CEO who took you to Germany, introduced you to investors, trusted you to close $1 billion deal, took you out to dinner, kissed you multiple times. And," Livia added, sniffling, "and didn't tell me he had a crazy ex who still thinks she's his wife." Camila huffed, rolling her eyes. "Okay, point taken. But girl, he's a man, and men are sometimes, you know." Livia raised an eyebrow. Sometimes. Camila waved her hand in the air. "Clueless, lost, messy, sometimes dumb, but not because they don't love you. It's just how they are. Comes with the package." Livia smiled, even through the tears. "You're unbelievable." Camila sat next to her, took her hands, and now spoke more seriously. "Look at me. This guy is completely in love with you. Even I, who wasn't there, can see it. Do you really think a CEO, surrounded by people all day, would waste time just to see you? Or take you out to dinner in Germany? Or look at you the way he does, in a way that makes even me blush, just sitting here on this couch?" Livia took a deep breath, closing her eyes tightly. I'm just scared, Camila. Scared of getting hurt. Scared of not being enough." Camila held her face in both hands, looking straight into her eyes. "Listen to me. You are enough. And if he doesn't know that, then he's the one who doesn't deserve you." Livia sighed, looking up at the ceiling. "And what if he comes after me?" Camila smiled, flopping back onto the couch. "Well, my friend, then we let him sweat a little, just so he learns." And at that exact moment, across town, David was standing at the front door of her building, wearing a suit but without a tie, hair slightly messy, holding a bouquet of flowers. Yes, him, the CEO of the company, the man who never ever did this kind of thing, was standing there, looking like a teenager about to confess his feelings at the school dance. He took a deep breath, pressed the intercom button, and waited. "Hello?" Camila's voice came through. "Hey, it's David. Can I speak to Livia?" he asked, adjusting his blazer, clearly nervous. Camila tried not to laugh. "Well, that depends. Did you bring pizza?" David blinked, confused. "Pizza? Just kidding. Come on up," she answered as the door buzzed open. He walked in, climbed the 3 flights of stairs, almost running, and stopped in front of the door. He took another deep breath, straightened the flowers, and knocked. When the door opened, Livia was standing there, wearing sweats, hair up in a messy bun, eyes still puffy, holding a mug of tea. The moment she saw him, she froze. "David?" He raised the flowers, a little awkward. "Hey." Camila, sitting on the couch, raised her eyebrows, smiled, and quietly grabbed her phone to start recording. "This is going straight to the girls' group chat," she whispered to herself. David took a deep breath, gripped the flowers a little tighter, and spoke. "Everything all at once. I know I should have told you. I know I messed up, and I get it if you don't want to hear me out. But I couldn't let you think, not even for 1 second, that you're not enough. Because, Livia, you are. You're amazing, smart, funny, incredible, stubborn, a little clumsy." He smiled, looking right at her. "And I've never felt this way about anyone in my life. Ever." Livia gripped her mug, blinking fast, trying to hold back tears. "David?" He stepped closer and gently took her hand. "Please, just listen. You've completely turned my life upside down in a way no one else ever has. And I don't want, not even for 1 second, to live a day without you in it." She smiled, biting her lip, but the tears were already running down her face. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that." He took a deep breath, squeezed her hands, and said with absolute certainty, "I choose you, Livia. Only you. Today, tomorrow, every single day." Camila sniffled from the couch. "Oh my God, this is better than anything on Netflix." Livia laughed through her tears, shaking her head. "You are completely crazy." "I am," David replied, smiling. "Crazy about you." And then, without thinking, without fear, without any more doubts, they kissed. A kiss that had no room for hurt or uncertainty. Only love, longing, and the absolute certainty that this was it. This was them. It was meant to be. When they finally pulled apart, Camila clapped her hands from the couch. "Okay, beautiful, emotional, Oscar-worthy scene. Now, can I order pizza?" David laughed, looked over at her, and said with a grin, "My treat. Love it." "You can stay, CEO," she said, crossing her arms. "You're approved." Livia laughed, shaking her head, looking at David with that smile he already knew he never wanted to live without. A few days had passed since the big reconciliation, and honestly, it felt like the entire universe was conspiring to make absolutely everything go perfectly. David seemed lighter, happier, and according to the company staff, even the atmosphere in executive office had changed. The CEO, once known as cold, calculated, and reserved, now looked like he'd been kidnapped and replaced by someone completely smitten, enchanted, and, believe it or not, even funny. Livia, meanwhile, was trying to stick to her routine, but pretending nothing had happened was pretty much impossible. After all, She was living the kind of romantic story most people only saw in movies. Except this time, she was the lead. And as if that wasn't enough, something very, very unexpected was about to happen. That morning, the office was buzzing. Everyone was talking about the big quarterly results presentation. After all, following the billion-dollar deal sealed in Germany, which, let's be honest, had been saved thanks to Livia, the company had hit record-breaking numbers. There was so much excitement that even Livia, who usually stayed tucked away in the IT department, was invited to join the main conference room with the directors, managers, and, of course, David. Feeling both shy and proud, she settled into her chair, watching the charts on the big screen, trying her best not to look too nervous. After all, he was right there, in a suit, looking impeccable, pacing back and forth as he delivered the presentation. David spoke with confidence, explaining the results, pointing to the charts, highlighting every achievement, every milestone, and every so often, his eyes found hers. That look, the one only the two of them truly understood. "And thanks to the commitment of our entire team," he said, walking across the stage, "we achieved a 22% growth, an absolute record in the company's history." Applause filled the room. Everyone clapped, proud and excited. Livia smiled, watching it all, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride, not just for being part of the company, but for being part of his life. David paused, took a deep breath, glanced at the screen, then back at the audience, and suddenly, his eyes locked directly onto hers. He held the microphone with both hands, adjusted his tie, took a deep breath again, and then smiled. "Well," he began, walking slowly to the center of the stage. "Before I continue, there's something much more important I need to say today." The board members looked at each other, confused. Some even whispered. Livia, on the other hand, widened her eyes. A chill ran down her spine. "What is he doing?" she thought, clenching her hands in her lap. David looked straight at her, took a deep breath, and in the next second, turned off the lapel mic. "I know this wasn't in the script," he said, now speaking without a mic, just his voice, yet it still seemed to fill the entire room. "But anyone who knows me knows that life's too short to waste time." He stepped off the stage. Yes, stepped down. Slowly walked over to where Livia was sitting. Everyone followed him with their eyes, not understanding anything. When he stopped right in front of her, he pulled something from his blazer pocket. A box, a small blue box. Livia covered her mouth with her hand. "No, no, no," she kept saying, barely able to speak, feeling her heart about to leap out of her chest. David got down on one knee. Yes, the CEO of the company, the most powerful man in the building, was kneeling. The room froze in shock. The HR director nearly dropped her tablet. One of the managers spilled his coffee on the floor, and Lucas from IT blurted out, "Oh my God," throwing his hands to his head. David opened the box, revealing a ring that looked like it came straight from a Tiffany's display. Simple, elegant, perfect. He looked right into her eyes, took her hand, and with a smile full of love, nerves, and total certainty, said, "Livia, you've turned my world completely upside down, and honestly, I never want it to go back, because never in my whole life have I felt so limpur, so whole, so happy, as I do with you." She squeezed his hand tighter, the tears already streaming down her face. David took a deep breath, held the ring, and added, voice steady, but full of warmth, "So, before we go on with any meeting, any presentation, anything in this world, I just need to know one thing." He smiled, Will you marry me? For a few seconds, the whole world stopped. Livia looked at him, at the ring, at the people around them, then back at him, and suddenly burst into tears and laughter at the same time. "Yes, you crazy man," she shouted, throwing her arms around his neck as the whole room erupted in cheers, applause, and laughter. David stood up, spun her in the air, holding her close and laughing while everyone clapped, filmed, shouted, and even got emotional. Lucas, filming on his phone, turned to a colleague and said, "I knew it. I knew it. This is better than any show on TV." The finance director wiped his eyes, pretending it was nothing. "Someone's cutting onions in here, I swear." Even the HR director, usually the most serious one in the company, was smiling, hands over her heart. "My God, this is... She shook her head. Perfect. David slipped the ring on her finger, cupped her face and kissed her, right there in front of everyone. No fear, no shame, no protocol. When they finally pulled apart, he looked into her eyes and whispered, "Just for her. You're my choice. Today, tomorrow, every day of my life." She smiled, holding his face, and replied, "And you're mine." And in that moment, there was no employee, no company, no contracts, no goals or meetings. There was only the two of them. 2 months later, the soft sound of violins filled the garden. The decor was stunning. White flowers, soft greens, light curtains swaying in the breeze, and an aisle delicately covered with petals. Well-dressed guests smiled, whispered, and adjusted their phones, ready to capture every second of what truly felt like a scene from a movie. And in a way, it was. A real-life movie. Standing at the altar was David. Impeccable suit, light-colored tie, perfectly styled hair. Well, up until that moment anyway, since he kept running his hand through it, visibly nervous. "Breathe, breathe," he muttered to himself, glancing at the officiant, then back at the aisle where she would walk in. Beside him, Lucas, now his best man, was trying hard not to laugh. Funny, the most feared CEO in the city shaking like a leaf. David smiled, adjusting his tie. "Shut up, Lucas. Relax, man." Lucas patted him on the back. "She's coming. And man, she looks stunning." "I saw her." David took a deep breath, ran a hand through his hair one more time, and in the very next second, the music changed. Everyone stood. The garden doors opened, and there she was, Livia, wearing a white dress, light and delicate, with a skirt that moved with every step she took. Her hair was loosely pinned up, with a few strands framing her face, and that smile that could light up any place on the planet. She took her first step and slightly tripped on the hem of her own dress. "Oh no," she whispered, grabbing onto her bridesmaid for support. David couldn't help himself, and right there in front of everyone, called out, "Trying to fall for me again, huh?" With that mischievous, playful smile only he had, the entire crowd burst out laughing. Livia covered her face with her hand, laughing and shaking her head set, and answered while still walking. "Seems like it's my favorite sport." Camila, her bridesmaid, and obviously the most excited of all, raised her bouquet in the air and shouted, "That's it, girl! Go for this amazing man!" Everyone laughed and clapped as she made her way to the altar, this time without tripping, but with cheeks completely flushed from both embarrassment and happiness in equal parts. When she stood in front of David, he took her hands and whispered, "You look absolutely stunning." She smiled, biting her lip. "And you look acceptable." She winked, making him laugh. The officiag cleared his throat, trying to regain control of a ceremony that was already far from traditional. Well, he adjusted his glasses. We're here today to celebrate not just the union of two people, but a story that I'd say is at least unique. Everyone laughed. The officiant looked at the two of them, smiling. David, would you like to say a few words? David took a deep breath, held her hands, looked straight into her eyes, and began. I thought a lot about what to say today, and honestly, there's no perfect speech, no right script, because everything we've been through since that day has been completely unscripted. Livia smiled, squeezing his hands, eyes already full of tears. David took another breath and went on. It all started with turbulence, and with you grabbing onto something you really shouldn't have. He paused, looking at the guests who immediately burst into laughter. Camila, from the bridesmaids' bench, almost fell over laughing. Oh my gosh, he actually said it. David turned back to her, smiling. And from that day, from that exact moment, I've been yours. Body, soul, heart, and well, the company too if you want it. He winked. Everyone laughed, applauded, and a few discreetly wiped away tears. I never imagined, never, that that flight would change my life. But it did. You came in the most clumsy and charming way possible, turned everything upside down, and made me realize I'd only been living half a life. He cupped her face with one hand, gently brushing her cheek with his thumb. You are my love, my best friend, my partner, my favorite kind of chaos, and the woman I want to share every bit of turbulence and every smooth landing life brings. Livia sniffled, laughing and crying at the same time. If you thought you'd give a sweet speech and I wouldn't cry, you're very wrong. The officiant smiled, looked at her, and asked, Livia, your words? She took a deep breath, looked at him, and began, her voice shaky but full of love. I never imagined that flight would be anything more than a personal disaster in the air, but if I had known that by grabbing, well, what I shouldn't have, I'd win you as a prize. She paused, laughing, while the entire crowd erupted again. I would have booked a round trip and 10 extra layovers just to be sure. Everyone clapped, laughing, and visibly moved. You are everything I never knew I needed, she continued, holding his hands. You're my calm, my storm, my organized chaos, and my love. David smiled, holding her hands tightly. The officiant smiling added, So in front of everyone here, I now pronounce you husband and wife. And before he could say another word, David pulled Livia by the waist, and without ceremony, without protocol, and without any hesitation, kissed her right there. A kiss full of love, laughter, promises, and everything they'd lived through up to that moment. The sound of clapping, cheering, whistling, and even a few woohoo filled the garden. When they finally pulled apart, David cupped her face and smiling said, You're now officially stuck with me. She smiled, wrapping her arms around his neck. And you are officially my personal CEO. Camila shouted from the back, CEO of love, and the whole crowd laughed again. They walked down the aisle, hand in hand, laughing, hugging friends, getting showered with petals, kisses, congratulations, and most of all, pure happiness. What did you think of Livia and David's story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating for this story? Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our stories. And take a moment to check out more inspiring stories by clicking right here on the end screen.